So one of the most important parts of telling your story while soloing is the ability to use motifs. We're going to focus on learning two types of motifs, rhythmic motifs and melodic motifs. So first we're going to work on 2-measure rhythmic motifs. The first rhythmic motif that we're going to focus on sounds like this. We're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Okay, we put some notes to that. Sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. You know, and here's that same example with different notes. So let's expand it a little bit further. You know, we're going to take that first rhythm, ba-da-ba, 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 and then we're going to like now add a different rhythm or change to a different motif. So let's say like ba-da-ba, 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 ba-ba-ba, ba-da-ba, ba-ba-ba. You put some notes to that, it'll sound like this. 3, I think that's what I said. So like that. Let me do it again. So so another way we can use those rhythmic motifs, we can also add a space, you know, put some space in there, and it's nothing like having some space to make the next thing you play even more impactful. So let's try that again with a little bit of space in there. All right, so 3 and. Okay, so this time we're going to take the chorus and I'm going to show you how we use this first rhythmic motif to establish the rest of the solo. You know, we're going to take the chorus.
Motifs are one of the most important aspects of humanity and human nature and connecting to things, right? You can find motifs in music, you can find motif in art, you can find motif in books, literature, you can find motifs in film. And the idea of motifs are really just themes, just repeated patterns that become themes. So if you think of the motif of a storyline, right? The theme of a storyline. Or if you're thinking about a song, the motif of the verse, right? What is that repeated melodic or rhythmic pattern that is constant in the verse? Same thing for the chorus. So having that repeated idea allows the listener or the viewer or the reader to connect to something. So we're taking that same concept and idea and applying it to our improvisation. So we're going to be focusing on two types of motifs, rhythmic and melodic. Now for this lesson, we're starting off with rhythmic, and Cory does a great job of demonstrating and explaining really the framework of starting to build those motifs and those themes. He explained 2-measure motifs, which is a great place to start because you're starting to create a theme on a smaller scale. And so if you can start to master or get comfortable with building from a 2-measure motif, then it becomes easier to start to expand that, right? So he started off with the 2-measure motif, and then he went to a 4-measure motif where you start to expand that theme or that idea a bit further. And then he started to apply a bit of nuance to it to try to make it a bit more musical by adding some space in there. That gives it a bit of variation. And then from that, he performed a demonstration where you saw a multitude of different smaller motifs that organically became the foundation and framework of other ideas that he was then building upon. You're gonna do the same exact thing. So we're soloing over the chorus of Love's in Need, and we're focusing on rhythmic motifs. So all that really means is you're going to decide and choose a rhythmic pattern that is going to be your motif. So you can use the one that Cory chose, or you can create your own. And we're starting with 2 measures, right? So you can literally create your own rhythmic pattern that you want to replicate over a 2-measure phrase. So the notes that you choose, like the pitches that you choose, of course, have to make sense with the chord. Like, you want to keep in mind all the things we've been working on, right? Diatonic harmony and chord tones and all that stuff. But the idea for the motif, for this lesson, we want it to be driven by rhythm. So the first thing you're going to be thinking about is, I'm trying to replicate this rhythmic pattern over a 2-bar phrase, which basically means we're going to create a rhythmic motif and build themes and ideas based off of that rhythmic motif. So if we quickly talk through the changes of the chords in those 2-measure increments, you'll start to see the chords that the 2-measure rhythmic motif will cover. So the first 2 measures of the chorus are the E-flat major chord and the C minor chord. So your first rhythmic motif idea is going to cover those 2 chords. Then the next 2 bars is G minor, right? So you're playing that G minor for 2 measures. So you're gonna take that same first rhythmic motif and apply it over the G minor chord for both of those measures. Then the next 2 measures are F minor. So you're gonna take that same initial 2-measure motif and apply it over the 2 measures of F minor. Then the last 2 measures of the chorus, measure 7 and measure 8, are C minor and B flat sus. So you're going to take that same 2-measure rhythmic motif and apply it over the C minor chord and then over that B flat sus chord. So that'll be your first time through. Now the second time through, you're going to create a 4-measure rhythmic motif. Right, so before we had a 2-measure, now we're expanding it to a 4-measure rhythmic idea. Then you go through the same steps, right? So that first rhythmic motif idea is going to cover the E-flat major, the C minor, the G minor, and the G minor. And then you're going to take that same initial 4-measure rhythmic motif idea, and it's going to cover the F minor, then F minor again, and then C minor, and then B flat sus. And now the third time through, we're going to take that same 4-measure rhythmic motif and just create some space, whether the space happens in the beginning of the motif, whether it happens in the middle of the motif, or it happens at the end of that 4-measure motif. Doesn't really matter where it happens. That's up to you. That's your creative choice. But we're going to add some space in there to give it some more variation and to let it kind of breathe a little bit. So you'll still cover the same 4 measures, right? The same E-flat, C minor, G minor, G minor. That's one motif phrase. Then the F minor, C minor, B flat sus is the second one. So we're still covering the same ground, same area, but now we're adding a space to give it a bit of, to give it some variation and some nuance. And now after you've done all of that, the very last thing you're going to do is perform through the chorus a couple times through, but now there's no restrictions as to whether you create a 2-measure motif or a 4-measure motif. Now you're just creating different motifs and building ideas off of it. And remember, this is rhythmic motif. So we're trying to create rhythmic patterns that we're applying different notes to as we're going through the changes. So have lots of fun with this one. Motifs are super essential to creating a cohesive solo. So be patient with yourself and explore.